Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this gorgeous, sunny, and chilly day. I'm Johanne Miller, Energy and Climate Program Director at VNRC. Very much appreciate you joining us for the second webinar in our winter webinar series, where we aim to take a deep dive into some timely clean energy and climate policy topics. Many of you may have joined us for a webinar we hosted 2 weeks ago, where we took a higher level overview of the policy efforts under consideration when it comes to clean energy, climate, and environmental policies. And today I'm excited to be going deeper on the clean energy and climate and fossil fuel reduction issues with four fantastic colleagues who are going to speak to a variety of timely conversations about climate and clean energy policy at play in the legislature at the moment. So just a quick agenda review. First, we're going to hear from Jenny Rushlow, who's a senior attorney for the Conservation Law Foundation in Vermont. Jenny will speak to a few issues, including grounding us in a high-level overview of our foundational climate policy, the Global Warming Solutions Act. Then we're going to hear from Peter Sterling, Executive Director of Renewable Energy Vermont, about some bills under consideration related to solar, a critical low-cost renewable energy technology, and an important component in our job sector. And as we are abundantly aware, clean energy, solar in particular, suffered some dramatic blows from the Trump administration's short-sighted retreat from clean energy. So we're going to hear about where we might fill in some gaps from Peter. Then we're going to hear from Rob Kidd, director of the Sierra Club chapter in Vermont, about what might be happening and why when it comes to transforming transportation to a more clean, affordable, multimodal transportation system. Then we're going to wrap the sort of overviews from our experts with Ben Edgerly Walsh, who's the Climate and Energy Program Director at VPIRG. And Ben's going to sort of sweep on what's happening on some other key issues, portable solar, appliance efficiency standards, and a few other important policy issues alive in the legislature. So then our aim is to dive deep with to have time for a Q&A. So please, if you have questions while folks are presenting and providing their update, please drop those questions in the chat. We're going to aim to get to as many of them as possible. And before I turn it over to Jenny, just want to say thanks again for joining us today, for all the work you do in your communities, in your professional lives, and your personal lives to help reduce energy costs, energy burdens, and help all Vermonters access and afford and benefit from clean, renewable energy resources. So I think we are all abundantly aware of the deeply damaging and short-sighted retreat happening at the federal level, which means the onus is on us at the state and local level to step in and step up at this very moment, because we know all the benefits that clean energy can provide and the impact of our warming world. So really want to thank you for showing up to talk about climate and clean energy, while we also know that so many deeply troubling things are happening in our country right now, and just wanted to sort of acknowledge that, my thoughts, I think many of our thoughts are with communities and people further afield, including folks in Minneapolis. So wanted to pivot our conversation into clean energy and climate, things that are fundamental focuses in this moment that we must continue to make progress on. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jenny Rushlow at the Conservation Law Foundation, to provide sort of an overarching overview from where she sits. So take it away, Jenny. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Joey. So as Joey mentioned, my name's Jenny Rushlow. I'm a senior attorney at Conservation Law Foundation, where I work in our climate and energy program. And I also currently lead our transportation work across the 6 New England states. Conservation Law Foundation is an environmental advocacy organization, primarily based in law as well as policy, that works across the 6 New England states. And I'm based here in Vermont. So what I'm going to do is just give you a bit of a lay of the land in terms of our core climate law, the Global Warming Solutions Act in Vermont, and what's going on with that, some key aspects of its implementation, and the relationship between that and what's going on at the federal level right now. Next slide. So the Vermont Global Warming Solutions Act, I'm sure many of you are very aware of what this law does. As far as Global Warming Solutions Acts go and state climate laws, this is a pretty good one that we have here in Vermont. Um, there are always ways in which it could be better. It doesn't get us all the way to net zero as the GWSA in places like Massachusetts does, but it has some key implementation hooks that many other states don't have. So it requires that the state adopt regulations, specifically the Agency of Natural Resources, that ensure that we achieve the targets for our GHG emissions reductions. And there's a provision in the statute that allows for people to sue the state if it doesn't pursue those regulations when required, and if it doesn't actually achieve the required emissions reductions by the deadlines in the law. So there's a lot to work with there, but a law is only as good as its implementation, right? So a couple of things we want to put on your radar for the GWSA. One is we need to continue to be vigilant to make sure that we continue to have the GWSA. As you well know, with all of the turnover in the state legislature, there are plenty of Republicans, especially, that would like to see the GWSA no longer exist or see it be substantially watered down. For instance, the provision that allows the state to be sued is greatly disliked by some members of the legislature. And so while we're not aware of bills that have been filed that would attempt to unravel or eliminate the GWSA currently, there have been recent attempts to significantly defang it. And so we need to continue to be vigilant to make sure that those kinds of provisions aren't added on to existing bills this session, because there have been sneaky attempts to try and move that swiftly through the legislature in the past. So that's a message that we need to continue sending to our legislators, that the GWSA is important and we want to maintain it in its current strength. So we need it to exist as a law, but we also need the law to be implemented. My organization, CLF, is doing quite a bit to ensure its implementation. For instance, we've already sued the Agency of Natural Resources once for its failure to collect data appropriately to show whether or not the state was actually on target to reach its emissions reductions. And that's really important that they collect that data, that they do it appropriately, that they use the right methods, because that's the basis for their decision of whether to adopt regulations that actually require polluters to reduce their emissions. So if they're not doing a good job of assessing whether they're meeting those emissions targets, then we can't be sure that they're making a good assessment of whether we need additional regulations or not. We weren't successful in that litigation in terms of the decision that came down from the court. They ruled in favor of the agency. However, the agency did take steps to improve their data collection methodology after the litigation was filed. So I would say that that is an indicator that that lawsuit provision in the law can lead to outcomes. And so that's an important part of implementation, is continuing to see whether litigation plays a role here. Additionally, the next regulation deadline for the Agency of Natural Resources is July 1st, 2026. So they are required to adopt regulations by that time. The Agency of Natural Resources has been very reserved in its approach to regulations under the GWSA, and in fact does not seem to have real plans to adopt regulations by that deadline that would be suitable under the GWSA. That's yet to be seen exactly, but that is a deadline to watch out for. That is advocacy that's valuable, is to make sure that the agencies themselves do their job to implement the work that the legislature has delivered to them through the GWSA. And just to put that into context regionally, CLF works on these issues throughout the region. And this is a theme that we're seeing everywhere. I think Vermont is in the unique position of having had the largest shift in our legislature of the other New England states. I mean, of really most states in the country. So it is particularly challenging here, but this is a wave um, yet to be seen how things will shift kind of mid-session places, because it does seem that Trump's popularity rating continues to go down, which may mean that states get braver in their willingness to go in different directions. But, in some ways we are limited to bills that are filed. It can be months ago in anticipation of session deadlines. So, as with many areas of the law, things can move a little slowly. Next slide. Okay, I want to talk about emissions reporting, and specifically emissions reporting in the context of a potential cap and invest program in Vermont. Next slide. So I'm going to speak to how Cap and Invest shows up in the 2025 Climate Action Plan in Vermont, as sort of a precursor to talking about emissions reporting. So the GWSA requires a climate council to produce a climate action plan that's updated periodically. The most recent one was released in 2025 and was the product of an enormous amount of work from many stakeholders, and is a consensus document in many respects. And so, that meant that advocates and members of the Scott administration had to get on the same page with a report that everybody could agree on, more or less. And perhaps the most exciting part of the plan in terms of big steps forward was the commitment to pursue, might be too strong of a word, but investigate Vermont joining a cap and invest program. There are a couple existing programs out there, including the state of New York, which is in the process of developing that program. It is not yet up and running. Vermont is interested in joining an existing cap and invest program. I don't think it's contemplated that Vermont would stand up its own. So in many ways, this is sort of dependent on New York moving forward with their program and it being a program that would be suitable for Vermont to join. But the Climate Action Plan does call for moving forward with that. And one of the first steps that would be required in order to do that is to develop an climate pollution emissions reporting framework. That's the first step that New York is pursuing for their program, and it's the first step that we need here. And that would allow us to collect data to understand what our GHG emissions are from all sectors covered by the GWSA. And that's something that, we have decent data currently on the electric sector. We have some data that we've been able to pull from federal sources, which are going away. So that source of data is becoming less reliable, being eliminated entirely. But there are certain sectors, namely transportation and home heating, buildings, that we don't have reliable data for, really. And so we need an emissions reporting framework to capture that information at all, if that's going to be included in a cap and invest program or just in general in order to move toward the emissions reduction targets that we have in the GWSA. We need to have reliable data on where the emissions are coming from and how they're evolving. So that responsibility for developing that fell on the Agency of Natural Resources coming out of the Climate Action Plan. And that agency issued a report to the legislature in December of 2025 saying what they thought that should look like. And one of the things they contemplated is, should that be a harmonized framework where the agency pulled together, compiled data from different departments and agencies within the state, because there are some kind of disparate reporting rules of various kinds across agencies? Or would ANR develop a standalone reporting rule where everybody would report their emissions data to ANR? And ANR recommends that a standalone rule would be best, would be simplest. Um, and what ANR recommends is that the legislature develop a reporting requirement bill that would call for ANR to collect this data. And ANR takes the position that they need the legislature to tell them to do that, and they need the legislature to appropriate the funds that would allow their agency to actually run a program like this. They've made the point that it's expensive to run a program like this. They've claimed that they need $800,000 in investment from the legislature to stand up this program. Query whether that is the right number. But certainly there is a need to establish funds that would allow the agency to successfully establish and maintain a reporting program. One thing I do want to point out is purely from a legal standpoint, the agency has sufficient authority to do a reporting program through regulation. They don't need additional authority from the legislature. I think they'd like it in order to, I think they're concerned about legal challenges to this rule and feel that there'd be some safety in legislation. Some of our legislative allies are interested in pursuing legislation to this effect. And, moving this forward one way or another, finding the funds, even in these very challenging fiscal times, is a priority of the Climate Council, of many of our organizations, of our legislative allies. And so this is a really important part of advocacy priorities right now. Next slide. Finally, I just want to spend a moment talking about filling federal gaps. There are a lot of ways in which the landscape of what environmental resources and regulations and data collection looks like coming from the federal government right now. And there are places where we need to step in and fill the gaps in Vermont. Next slide. And without listing all of the many programs that have been defunded in particular, I'll just identify that, there are multiple programs that funded the building out of solar and other renewables, and those programs have been cut. In some cases, Vermont had already allocated funding to projects that has then been rescinded after those promises were made. There's also funding that was dedicated to climate resiliency, disaster mitigation that has been defunded. There are essential climate science functions that the federal government was performing. I mentioned some of the data that had been provided by the federal government that is no longer provided. And there continues to be pretty vicious pushback on state climate laws. We're seeing that in Vermont right now with the Climate Superfund law that's been challenged by the federal government. That's something that CLF is involved in that litigation, defending the law, along with the Attorney General and a number of other environmental NGOs. So coming up with money to fill those federal gaps, it feels nearly impossible. But to point out that those are the areas that were already difficult and have become more difficult. I know that others are going to speak to some of those renewables issues. But yeah, so these are some of the priorities we're looking at the top level, and I will turn it over to Joey to move us
Yeah.
along.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for that really important sort of foundational context and just the underscoring of where the new federal reality puts the onus on us as states and communities to step in and step up. And that goes for many issues, including the solar sector. So, Peter Sterling, can you provide an update on a couple of the policies under consideration to continue to support solar deployment in Vermont? Thanks, Peter. And
Sure.
thanks.
Let me get my share going here. Great. Um, so as many of you probably have heard, the federal the federal government has terminated the 30% tax credit for residential solar, previously scheduled to run through 2032.
Peter, do you
They,
want to put that in like full view mode? Is that possible?
uh, is it not in full view mode for
No, we
you?
can see your other slides, but it's not a big deal. But if you could,
Um, all right.
slideshow, whatever.
Oh, yeah, let me get to that. How is that better? No.
Just all good. Move forward.
Okay, move forward. All right, the Trump administration, um, the EPA also withdrew the $62 million in solar for all funding designed to help low-income Vermonters go solar. Many of us would say that Vermont needs to respond to these attacks by the federal government to make sure Vermonters can continue to go solar for all at home, excuse me. In addition to what the federal government has done, the Public Utility Commission has steadily reduced the compensation Vermonters receive for net metering since 2017. They do this by setting adjusters every 2 years, and this next update will begin later this year. Further reductions to these adjusters on top of the ITC will continue to put solar out of reach for more and more Vermonters. Just give everyone a second to look at that slide. Fortunately, Senator Ann Watson has introduced S-170, which would prevent the Public Utility Commission from making residential net metering more unaffordable for the next 2 years, to help offset a part of the loss of the federal tax credit. Also, we have a great bill in the House by Chris Morrow, H716, which would do much of the same thing to stop the Public Utility Commission from making it more unaffordable to net meter at home. We really could use all of your help in getting these bills passed. So particularly if you live in the district of one of the members of the Senate Natural Resource Committee, Washington County, Addison County, Bennington County, or Caledonia County, really would appreciate you contacting your senator, asking them to please, please support moving S-170 forward. In better news, one of the priorities for Rev and many of the allies on this call, including VNRC, Sierra Club, CLF, Nature Conservancy, and VPIRG, is fixing the single plant law. Single plant basically put up a big barrier to putting solar on sites that already had solar. So here, this picture showed an old gravel pit up in Hardwick that had a solar array, and all the land that's part of that gravel pit that would be off limits. The Public Utility Commission, thanks to the law that got the House Energy Committee passed last year and was signed by the governor, of course, directed the PUC to come up with language that would fix this problem. But thanks to a lot of great advocacy, the PUC has put out language that we think is entirely acceptable and to allowing for co-location of solar. And just to give you a scope of how much money this could save, in addition to preserving, some open spaces, is when we use existing power lines, that saves about $10,000 per 100 feet of power lines. I mean, that has a real impact on lowering the cost of going solar. We used an example in testimony that using an existing road on an existing site instead of building a new one saved over $50,000, and the road is only 1,500 feet long. So it's not even like that big a road to access solar. So we're talking about big savings for going solar. Again, the benefits of this single plant that we started last year, saves ratepayers money by lowering the cost of renewables, promotes solar smart growth, and reduces the need for redundant infrastructure. So I'm happy to answer any questions about any of those initiatives on what you can do to help protect net metering or help promoting solar smart growth by eliminating the single or restricting single plant rulings. I'm happy to answer questions any other time if you want to get in touch. And if there are no other questions, I'm happy to hand it
Peter,
back to you.
There are a couple of questions, and I know too, you have to peel a little bit early. One from John Hart in Rockingham. Wouldn't S-170 increase the cost electricity to other ratepayers? I know that this is something you work on and think on. Would you speak to that?
Sure. Um, there would be, well, there is a small cost shift, measured in, couple dimes per month for most ratepayers by freezing that. I would also add that when our public service department measures this cost shift, part of their formula includes a calculation for lost sales, which I think is a kind of spurious way to calculate the expense to other ratepayers when someone buys a more efficient refrigerator or turns off the lights or gets, any kind of more efficient light bulb. That's also a lost sale to utility, yet we don't ascribe a cost shift to other ratepayers from that. We only do it for net metering. So saying that, part of the expense of net metering is a utility gets to sell a customer less power, to me isn't really a legitimate way to calculate the true cost of net metering on a rate bill.
Thanks, Peter. And one last question for you, and then we're going to turn it over to Rob. Question from Steve Crowley regarding the PUC and the adjusters. Does the growing target under the res impact the PUC's value of solar?
No, those are kind of separate questions. The department actually publishes their value of solar, which they currently call about 7 cents a kilowatt hour. We think that vastly under, it misses some parts of the value of solar, including the social cost of carbon, which they don't use as part of their calculation. We think the value of solar is much higher, but the res will certainly continue to incentivize or require Vermont utilities to purchase more solar. And a big part of the value of solar, I think, for all of us on this call, is every time we put up a solar panel in Vermont, at some point it displaces the burning of fossil fuels for electricity elsewhere in New England. And as we know, we don't have baseload natural gas plants here in Vermont. And I just want to say right now, I just went to the ISO New England resource mix. Because it's cold out, we've had to throw the peaker plants on. Right now, our resource mix has 26% oil, not in addition to another 21% natural gas. So when you wonder why it's worth spending money to put on renewables, it's to stop those peaker plants and natural gas plants from coming on, so right now our New England grid mix is about 50% fossil. That is really, really not good for climate right now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your work. We can follow up with more information as we track this. And clearly, we need to continue to build out a cleaner, more resilient, renewable grid, and especially as we lean into electricity for other energy needs, including how we heat our homes and get where we need to go. And so a lot more work to do there, and to talk about the work that we can continue to do this legislative session in the transportation arena, where about 40% of our climate pollution comes from, and where a significant chunk of our average household energy bills come from. Let's talk about transforming transportation. And Rob, please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Joey, and thanks for everybody else for joining this. So actually, Joey just stole my thunder. Why do we want to work on transportation? And that's the number one is it's about 40% of our state's climate pollution. That's a huge chunk, and there's a lot of ways we can do that. We can do that with electrification. We can do that with encouraging more bike and pedestrian access. We can do that with more transit. But then also, I want to throw this statistic for everybody out here, because the governor likes to spout about affordability all the time. And just kind of talking about affordability, the AARP came up with a study that basically it shows about $17,000 a year for the average household that pays in transportation. The maintenance, the vehicle, the cost to get into different places, that's a huge burden. And so just continuing the current paradigm of relying on single occupancy vehicles is a major economic barrier to a lot of Vermonters. So I wanted to kind of flag that. But I want to just kind of throw here the major challenges that are out today in transportation. Basically, first off, the Trump administration illegally freezing and delaying EV charging funds. Again, lawsuit after lawsuit, the Trump administration has been struck down. Sierra Club has been involved with a lot of these lawsuits, the AG's office, a lot of other NGOs, and we've basically been cleared that the Trump administration cannot freeze these charging funds. So we're going to be still increasing our access to public charging, which is highly critical. Also, it's already mentioned the end of electric vehicle incentives, but the good news is the average cost of the EVs are still continuing going, and it's getting closer to parity with internal combustion engines. So you could still purchase an electric vehicle and still be able to save money because the overall life cycle cost of an electric vehicle is lower. Also, just kind of put us on a word, Trump is trying to attack the CAFE standards, reducing emission standards. It's terrible. We're going backwards on every single policy with there. Then there's huge federal uncertainty to the funding of transportation projects, which is very concerning to Vermont because nearly half of our funds are derived from federal dollars. So when we're saying federal dollars, a lot of them are going to paving our roads, fixing our bridges. And so with less money coming in federally, then the state's budget is going to be really tapped. So it's a major challenge. Also, Vermont transit providers are cutting routes, particularly Green Mountain Transit and some of the rural providers. So we're going backwards in policy, but also I want to flag that a lot of that has to do is also ridership is way down. Post-pandemic, people aren't traveling as much via transit. So you as an individual by riding transit can help actually restore that. The transportation bill major $33 million shortfall, which then prevents us from accessing other federal matching funds to pay for these programs. There's huge uncertainty with advanced clean cars too. I don't know if you all remember at the end of last year, the governor and his allies were trying to cut our involvement in clean car programs, and the governor even delayed any type of enforcement on that. But then Congress is actually stripping California's ability to do programs like that, exemptions. So we're in a lot of uncertainty around there. Now, I want to just flag about the advancement of clean cars. We've done a lot of great progress. Vermont leads the country in access to public charging, and we're high up in the ability of the purchasing of EVs. I know what last numbers we were over 15% of our market share. So Vermonters have done a lot of good work to transition despite all the changes, and that's what's really going to change us. Then the major problem here is it's all budget. The Vermont Transportation Committees in the House and Senate deal mostly with the transportation budget. And with the budget shortfalls, Jenny Russell already talked about the cap and invest. We hopefully can get something in that, bring out fees. There's talk about adopting an EV mileage-based fee, but actually we prefer if it goes across the board to all vehicles. There's talk about a delivery fee. But the major issue today is the governor and a lot of his Republican allies have introduced legislation and proposals to switch out money from what's known as the purchase and use tax from the education fund and bringing that back to transportation. The purchase and use tax is the tax you pay on when you purchase a vehicle. That mostly goes to the transportation fund, but over years they've carve some of it out to go to education. It's going to be a political hot potato because our education system is really messed up. So I want to flag that because there's going to be a huge debate going on in there around the transportation committees, which then could potentially hurt our other advocacies. They're already laying off staff. I think there's up to 50 something staff members at the Agency of Transportation are laid off. They've reshuffled the deck on the policy and planning and put it under highways. So we're in some tough times. But I want to kind of give you an idea. You could still advocate for different things. We can move forward. We can continue even with the budget crisis. We can continue pushing for funding for downtown and village tax credits, revitalizing the centers, and retaining smart growth for housing. We can, making sure the state establishes a vehicle miles traveled reduction target. We're encouraging people to not travel. Also, we have to be able to maintain funding for public transit, active transportation, multimodal programmings, bike and pedestrian infrastructure. If we maintain those, we won't slip as much, but there's going to be more pressures to do that. And then also, kind of, even though there is no very little money, as I remember I said, it costs $17,000 for somebody to operate for their transportation costs in Vermont. We want to see reinstating low-income electric vehicle and e-bike incentives, and also encouraging the adopting a right to charge to allow more Vermonters to access electric vehicles and be able to charge at home. So pay attention to the budget crisis that's happening, because it can impact some of this work we're doing. And it's not going to be easy, but we've made success, and we will still continue out. And if you get out and bike, and you get out and ride your electric vehicle and take transit, we can change that. So if you want to talk more about this, I want to invite you all to this coming Saturday, 31st in Burlington, 4:00, our Sierra Club Winter Gathering with our National Director, Lauren Blackford, will be there. And I just threw the link in there. Please attend, and you can talk more to me.
Thank you, Rob. Woo! Whirlwind on transportation. We know we're throwing a lot at you, and our last but not least, final speaker, who will sweep on a variety of really important conversations and efforts, including some successes already, is Ben Edgerly-Walsh of VPIRG. Take it away, Ben. And we're going to continue to drop your questions in the chat. We'll aim to get to them, as many of them as possible. Go ahead, Ben.
Thanks so much, Joey. Thanks for everyone for being here today. So I'm going to try to be pretty quick so that we can have some time for Q&A. First up, the portable solar bill, S202. In exciting news, that's actually going to be voted on by the full Senate basically when this webinar wraps. It is on the floor for the session that starts at 1 today. This bill is essentially the legislation that cuts all the red tape for these small, portable, you might have heard them called balcony solar arrays or plug-in solar arrays. They're small arrays, 1, 2, maybe 3 standard size solar panels, along with an inverter and maybe a battery. And the thing that makes these special is the inverter has a plug that can plug right into an exterior wall outlet. So you've got solar panels connected to the unit, and then that plugs directly into an outlet, as opposed to needing to be wired into the home by an electrician. So this is very common in Europe. There's maybe 4 million of these systems in Germany. They're about big enough to, depending on the size, so the smallest end to the largest end of them, to generate about 5 to 15% of the electricity that a typical home would use over the course of a year. So much smaller than a typical solar array. And the idea here is to just get rid of all the red tape. If you get one of these, you shouldn't have to wait. You shouldn't have to pay a fee or, ask permission to install one of these in your home. You should just be able to do it. The vision is that this is truly plug and play. It's something that's really accessible for renters, for really, as many people as possible who haven't been able to go solar in the traditional ways. It's not clear that that's going to be possible in the United States right from the jump, based on the safety regulations and certifications that are involved. Not getting into the weeds, that's something that we still think is going to happen, but probably would not. You probably wouldn't be able to plug one of these into a wall with literally no electrical work in your home right upon passage of this bill, which we had initially been hoping for. The technology is evolving rapidly, though, and we still think that vision is actually going to come to pass, and that this bill is a huge step in the right direction. It would make Vermont the second state in the country to enable these kinds of solar arrays. There are a whole bunch of other states looking at this, including some of our neighbors like New York. Next, the appliance efficiency standards bill. So appliance efficiency standards are the sort of the floor for efficiency of appliances in the United States. You've probably heard of Energy Star. That's the high bar that you clear if you have a very good, very efficient product. Appliance efficiency standards are the minimum efficiency level for energy, or in some cases water, that the federal government sets. And if an appliance does not meet that standard, it cannot be sold in the United States. So it's a standard on manufacturers. They've been in existence for decades. They've saved American consumers literally trillions of dollars, trillions with a T, in energy and water costs. And of course, the Trump administration is trying to gut them. So back in 2017 in Trump 1.0, Vermont passed a law that adopted all of these federal standards here in Vermont. So if they ever went away at the federal level, that they would still be in existence here in Vermont, that Vermont consumers would still be protected. That's what we're trying to do again this year. And the idea is that it would update that 2017 law to include all of the standards from the Biden administration. So basically inauguration day from this year would be the new date. So that's probably going to be starting in the House. Although there's certainly interest in both the House and the Senate. We expect that to be taken up later in the legislative session in House Energy. I also want to touch briefly on the Climate Superfund Act. Obviously, this is an enormous priority for VPIRG and for many of the organizations on this call and in the state in the climate space. It is being implemented right now. It is also being challenged in court. That is playing out in the coming months. So we're really focused on, one, defending it. There is a bill, H518, that would repeal it. That has been introduced in the House. If that comes up, obviously, we're going to push back very hard. We have no interest in the state kowtowing to the oil industry and letting them off the hook financially for the climate crisis they created. We also want to make sure that the resources are there for this law to be implemented. There was money appropriated in the initial bill 2 years ago and an additional appropriation last year. We have not seen a request for additional funding this year, so there may not be a need in the budget, but we're watching that very closely and will be again next year, regardless of what happens this year, to make sure that it can really be effectively implemented. And then last, but certainly not least, you heard a little bit about the defense that we're playing from Jenny Rushlow from CLF earlier on the Global Warming Solutions Act. Obviously, I just mentioned the Climate Superfund Act is under attack. The renewable energy standard that was overhauled in 2024 is also very much under attack. There were bills introduced last year and again this year. H601 is a piece of legislation that would turn it from a renewable energy standard into a quote unquote clean energy standard that would include nuclear power. And then that bill actually goes much further on nuclear power. It does two major things to existing state law in addition to significantly weakening the renewable energy standard. It removes a provision in law that gives the legislature the authority, that requires the legislature to approve a new nuclear plant if one is proposed in Vermont. Right now, a new nuclear plant could not be built in Vermont without the legislature's approval. That's fundamentally anti-democratic, and it takes away an important check and oversight that the legislature has and has had for decades. Number two, it also would allow a nuclear waste dump at the site of Vermont Yankee in Vernon in southern Vermont. There's obviously nuclear waste there now, but there's currently a prohibition on waste from outside of the former VY plant at that site. And that prohibition would be lifted, which would allow nuclear waste from other nuclear power plants from around the country to be shipped to and stored at that site near Brattleboro. So that's obviously incredibly concerning to us as well. And we're going to be pushing back very strongly on that bill. So that's the whirlwind tour through the last handful of things in our climate and energy work this year. And I think we've got about 15 minutes left for questions.
Whew, indeed a whirlwind tour. And Ben, before I let you off the spot, And maybe I will go back to the top of the chat and the Q&A from William April, NPR announcing today that Trump administration drastically revised safety and environmental regs on nuclear power. What safety measures do we have in Vermont? Ben, I think you can speak to this, and others might write down.
Yeah, I absolutely can. So if folks have not seen that, you should definitely take a look at that story that NPR broke this morning. It does look like the Trump administration is attempting to gut a whole host of safety and security regulations on nuclear power in the United States. That's obviously concerning for all sorts of reasons. That is breaking news. They got a hold of, it sounds like, leaked documents that are not public. And so this is something that we're learning about in real time along with all of you. In terms of the specific, well, actually, let me just say, and this is speculation, I want to be very clear, I do not have any specific information about this, but I would be very surprised if this was not challenged in court, as so many things the Trump administration is trying to do extra legally are. But that aside, the specific answer to the specific question, what safety measures do we have in Vermont? Under the Atomic Energy Act of, I don't remember the year, but many decades ago, safety of nuclear power is exclusively the domain of the federal government and federal regulation. Vermont and the other 49 states have no ability to regulate safety at nuclear power plants, and that is not something we were attempting to do. So that's the reality there, and we'll be following that very closely. That being said, there are legitimate grounds that we can regulate, especially new nuclear plants and nuclear waste in our state. And that's why we're so concerned about H601, because it would substantially weaken the legal requirements that we have right now, and that are on very solid legal ground.
Thank you, Ben. Do other folks have questions? Did I get to all of them in the chat? I'm just trying to appreciate your comment. I appreciate a couple of the comments from Avram and others, trying to make sure that we're addressing people's questions. One thing that I will just take moderator's prerogative to do is to just let folks know that there's an effort underway to the Public Service Department commence rulemaking on the state's residential and commercial building energy codes. As some of you are well aware and have been deeply involved in, we know that strong energy codes help to, cut energy costs, especially over time, and certainly cut climate pollution. There was a rigorous stakeholder process that the Public Service Department undertook rulemaking in like a few years ago, and issued a new energy code as of 2024. The governor issued an executive order last fall proposing to essentially make it, you could comply with the 2020 energy code or the 2024 energy codes, and making it very ambiguous for builders and others, and also potentially, locking people into higher energy costs and climate pollution by building less high performance homes and buildings in Vermont. So I wanted to just share that with you because there is a public meeting on February 2nd. I can drop that into the chat. And there is also a public comment deadline on February 9th. So wanted to make sure you are aware of that. And I will put that into the chat in case, I know many of you have been deeply involved, and I think it's important to sort of weigh in at this moment if you have time, interest, and expertise. Are there other questions? Here's one, something about nuclear. Ben, would you want to talk about articulating primary concerns with new nuclear generation and storage in Vermont? I think there's lots of interest in the new question.
Sure. And this is something that we don't have any concrete plans for, but we've been talking about the need for a webinar, more education on this. So I'll be brief since we've already covered it a couple of times, and there might be other questions we need to get to. I will say on new nuclear plants, a big part of the concern, frankly, is economic. When nuclear power was first proposed around about 80 years ago, and basically constantly since then, nuclear power has been pitched as this. I mean, originally the phrase was too cheap to meter, and now people don't say that anymore because it's got a bad reputation, but this incredibly affordable, amazing energy source that was going to solve all of our problems. And obviously that has never played out and has consistently come in off schedule and far over budget. The most recent example being the plants proposed, constructed in Georgia, that ran many billions of dollars over budget. So now we're hearing about these, small modular reactors, SMUs, and yet again are being sold this, bridge in Brooklyn that this is going to be the thing that solves all of our electricity problems at a moment in our country's history where electricity is getting more and more expensive and electricity demand is going up. This is believe it when you see it kind of a situation, and the country has been burned many times in the past. So the idea that we would in Vermont weaken the oversight and the public transparency around constructing a new nuclear power plant given that context just does not make any sense. There's also, a host of other legitimate state concerns like land use and on down the line. So I think I'll just leave it there. Again, we've covered this a bunch, and we may do another webinar on this. And there are certainly other experts that we would want to bring in if we're going to do a deeper dive that have more specialized knowledge than I do.
Thanks, Ben. I just want to make sure I get to one of the first questions that was asked referencing the 2024 Vermont Clean Energy Industry Report, indicating that Vermont remains per capita a national leader in clean energy deployment. Are we going to hear an update trends? I would guess yes. I think that as people know, the investment tax credits for the residential solar sector in particular ended in the end of December 2025. So I think the impact of the industry will take a little bit to understand and sugar out. But that is something, the Clean Energy Industry Report is something that the Clean Energy Development Fund helps to support. And I think will be something that they will continue to help to support. So stay tuned for that. It's a really important question.
Joey, can I jump in
please.
on one that I saw
Yeah.
in the chat? It wasn't a question so much as a comment, but I did just want to clarify one thing. William April said these solar arrays, I believe he was referring to the portable solar arrays that I spoke to. These solar arrays will be a big help to camps. I don't disagree with that, but I did just want to clarify these kinds of arrays can already be used off-grid and already are being used off-grid. If you have a home or camp or whatever that's not connected to the electric grid, you can, and obviously people have gone solar all sorts of different ways in those sorts of situations for many, many, many years. You could buy one of these systems today and plug it into a building like that. That is not regulated. There's no interconnection agreement. Obviously, you don't need to talk to your utility because you're not connected to their system. That's available today. What this new bill, S202, does is it allows grid-tied homes to actually access that same technology and removes the sort of regulatory barriers that are currently in place if you are grid-tied and would like to do this at the same time.
Thank you. And side note, as we look to hopefully, with your help, move the portable solar bill over the line, we will definitely do a deep dive webinar and celebration on the heels of that success. Not wanting to get over my skis, but I think there are really good questions, opportunities, and I know there's a tremendous amount of interest at the local level in the small scale portable solar and all the flexibility and affordability it can provide. lot of interest in nuclears. Julian, I just am curious. I want to make sure I understand your thoughts on the webinar. Yes, okay, thank you. You are interested in nuclear, as are many of our legislative friends, allies, and others. So I think people will be doing a deeper dive into the nuclear question and the potential, risks, either historical or still remaining, to sort of edify ourselves as the issue gains traction and interest. So need to understand this. So I appreciate all of the comments. If we've gotten to all of the questions, and Steve, I can loop in with you after I verify on your questions about 718. I think I will say thank you to our panelists, to Jenny, to Peter, to Rob, and to Ben for joining us today. Thanks to each of you for lending your time today and all you do locally and beyond. And keep in touch as we look to do, I think on February 13th, we're partnering or just following the lead of our partners at the Energy Action Network, who are going to be hosting a webinar on heat pumps. So stay tuned. We'll send out more information on that. And a huge thanks to my technological wizards and allies in my shop, Evelyn Seidner in particular, for helping to pull this and other webinars together. So it's a beautiful, sunny, chilly day. Go out and enjoy it. Continue to do good work and stay healthy and focused in some pretty challenging times. So my best to all. Thanks so much again. More soon.